Well, everybody, first of all, it's great to be here again. I've got two people I would like now to introduce to you and for you to get to know. So I'd like to invite Vicky Robertson and Massimo Torero to come on. And while they're coming on and sitting down, I'll explain to you who they are and why we're going to have a conversation now. So Vicky Robertson is Secretary for the Environment and Chief Executive of the Ministry of Environment in New Zealand. She arrived yesterday off the plane, just not at all jet lagged. Thank you very much for coming and joining us. And in fact, it's very important I tell you that she works for Mana Tō Mo Te Taiao. And we will explain why I use that language and what the significance of that is when we're talking about the environment in a few minutes. I'm also joined by Massimo Torero Cullen. He's the chief economist at the Food and Agriculture Organization, but he's been having a colourful career of working also in the World Bank and in the International Food Policy Research Institute. So by way of framing our conversation, when we were listening to Johan Rockström yesterday morning, he described a planetary emergency. And when one is facing an emergency, it's necessary to have really skillful warriors. And the two people I'm sitting with are warriors for the future of people and the planet. And I'm going to invite them to tell us what they do in their role as warriors and what attributes they have for that work. And the reason for doing that is that I believe that many of us in this room, if not already warriors, are going to become warriors because we have such a massive task ahead of us in relation to this emergency. Planetary emergency is an emergency around food systems, about the environment, about livelihoods and security of people, and about climate change. And you've heard it all, but the people that I'm going to interview now are right in the midst of doing something about it. So I'm going to ask Vicky, first of all, in your role as Secretary and CEO in the Ministry of the Environment, what are you actually doing? And most importantly, what are you most proud of that's happened since you took up this job in April 2015?
Thanks, David. So what we're really doing is putting environment at the heart of all the decision making. So moving away from thinking that we'll make some money and then we'll look after the environment later, to actually putting it at the forefront of decision making. So you would have seen our government come out with the wellbeing budget just a few weeks ago, and that's the starting of putting environmental indicators into what do we think is a good life beyond GDP. And I have to say, it's for me personally, it's a small step forward, a really important one, but it's probably just a weighbridge towards what I think is a better future. And
environment at the heart of decision making. Please hold those words. And now I'm going to dig in a bit and ask, what did it take to get environment at the heart of decision making? How come it's been possible in New Zealand? Why isn't it happening in other countries? Certainly in my own work, I reckon I've only seen this in about 20 countries, and it's not enough. So why is it happening in New Zealand?
Yeah, I mean, I asked myself that question too, and I truly believe there's a right time. So I asked you earlier, is this a different time? And I think it is a different time. But I think for New Zealand, it's almost like a sense of going through a sense of grief for New Zealanders, and I'm sure for people in this room as well. We have a really strong identity to our land, and what's come up through our youth voice, our business voice, and civic society is that there is uncomfortableness about where we're at, and it particularly galvanised around water quality. And people talk not in terms of what they get out of water, in terms of how do they produce food or how do they, have drinking water. They talk about it in terms of things they did when they were kids. So it's a true identity piece and what they want to leave for their grandchildren. And the last election last year was won really on and discussed really around water quality. So a key environmental issue at the forefront of government.
And not just young people, apparently it was the whole electorate.
Yeah, so we're doing some polling, and waste is one of two top issues at the moment, below child poverty. Last year, water was in the top two. So, but I have to say, when I first came into the role, it wasn't like that.
Yeah.
And so things have shifted quite quickly. Plastic bags has been banned in New Zealand from July.
Yeah.
Not a huge environmental issue, but people feel like they want to do something.
So hold that one as well, that in New Zealand there has been a real shift in popular opinion, and we're going to go into that in more detail. I'll come back in a second to talk with Vicky about two other issues. One is about where agriculture and food fits into this great transformation that's happening in her country. And secondly, what about the people who've been in New Zealand for a very, very long time? What is their feeling about all this? But before I get into that, Massimo, are you okay there? I feel...
I'm okay.
I'm sitting a bit far away from you. The reason why I'm so pleased that you're sitting here is that in FAO, you are now looking at the transformation of food systems from a political economy perspective. And as you listen to Vicky talking about what's happening in New Zealand with this excitement about land and the environment and water, and basically putting that more into the centre of policy, do you see this happening in more and more countries as part of the transformation of food systems?
So let me start answering to your first comment. I think we are in an emergency, but I also think that there is light at the end of the tunnel.
Yeah.
The problem is, how long is the tunnel?
Yeah.
And our job is try to shorten that tunnel so that we can see the light. And that's what we try to do. We try to look at the policies that we are in place today and trying to see where they are really wrong and where they need to be changed. Because the problem we have in the agricultural sector, in the food sector, is that it's one of the most distorted systems in the world. The incentives are completely misaligned. So we need to find a way to correct that and to do the change. And let me underscore the change we need to do. We really need to change. It doesn't make any sense that we keep talking about nutritious food and most of the subsidies go to non-nutritious food. So how we align those things so that we can really shorten that tunnel, reducing the inefficiencies of the policies that are being implemented today, creating the correct incentives so that we can see the light. And that's, I think, the way we have to do. And it's not an easy job. It's a very complex.
And that's what I want to focus on now. I want to get into the politics of the transformation of food systems. It's not an easy job because it's contested. And Massimo, as you look around the world at governments that are, perhaps through the offices of their prime minister or through the agriculture minister, actually trying to shift food systems towards more nutritious foods, what are the challenges?
It's huge because, honestly, we're talking about food, and food is more than just agriculture. It includes many dimensions. It's multidimensional. And the problem is normally we thought of the Ministry of Agriculture or the Ministry of Health now, but it's also the Ministry of Finance. When we are talking of obesity, which is happening today, overweight and so on, we're talking of non-communicable diseases, which, as we were hearing yesterday, they are really, in a conference they are really communicable because they communicate in different ways.
Yes.
But to change that, you need to correlate and link all these ministries. And that creates a first problem. How I can convince a Minister of Finance of a change that we need to do? In Peru, Mrs. Arauz was talking, the way we did it in nutrition was to bring evidence, solid evidence, that we were able to convince the Minister of Finance to do the change and to bring a package of policy. So, again, the more best practices where we learn from your country, the better we can do, but we need to have proven concepts to be able to convince
people. How many countries, in your judgment, are making the shift? You don't have to name them, of course New Zealand is, but we've got 193 countries, 20 of them are in a very powerful group, but altogether, how many are shifting?
No, I cannot give you a number. I think that many countries are doing partial things, but we are still not in the package. We keep talking about food systems, but I am sure that if I ask you, any one of you, what a food system is, everybody will give me a completely different answer. And that's our main problem. We don't have a common definition. How do you expect a government to be able to do something if everybody is giving them policy recommendations which are different? So we need to come to a common understanding of this balancing act that we need, because it's very serious. We have to feed more people, but we have less resources, a huge constraint, less natural resources. How we do that? How we bring best practices?
Okay, it's an emergency. There is not a clear definition. There are some countries moving, but not many. It's a contested space, yet you're sitting here saying you do see light at the end of the tunnel, and you're trying to shorten the tunnel. So I go back to Vicky, and I say, are the people of New Zealand focused on the fact that we are entering into a planetary emergency? Who's most affected, and how are they actually supporting these changes that you're making?
Yeah, and I really love a little words I saw actually here in Stockholm, which is between wisdoms. And, you know, it's true to say our agricultural sector is one of our important export earners, really important sector for New Zealand, have been the backbone of our country. And But what I can tell you is that those farmers who are on the journey are doing an amazing job. So we have our most productive farmers are also best in environmental integrity.
Wow.
So we have people who are doing good things that you can point to and say, well, here you are, here's an example. That's not to say we don't have our challenges, because we do. We've just put in place, we've just introduced a bill which will give us some targets around climate and puts in 1.5 degrees as a target. But importantly, again, being bold and a bit courageous, has for the first time around the world has a split target around methane and carbon. So allowing people to come along with the journey, but also putting targets in place that mean they have to move. And that's changed the debate in New Zealand to not, you know, should agriculture be part of this, but when and how and over what time frame. And I think that's working, but it's not easy, as you say.
And I was going to ask a bit more, because I knew Helen Clark, when she was Prime Minister, had a really quite extraordinary time working with farmers and helping them to be in the lead of the change. New Zealand's agriculture sector is rated to be one of the cleanest, and the emissions are some of the lowest. But I suspect that still it's not an easy task to continue to ask the farmers to shift a little bit more to get better towards the targets that you've been set.
Yeah, and I think at the very heart of it, and this is an example of putting the environment at the heart, is you have to change what you value.
Yeah.
So for the good farmers, they are saying, I value having really high quality water in my farm system, so I'm willing to invest in making that happen. So it's not a cost that society is putting on them, it's part of them being the best in the world. And the conversation in New Zealand is more moving away from commodity production to who are the high, you know, people in this audience probably, high-end, high-value, who want to pay for integrity of product and the way that it's been grown.
So everybody, New Zealand and China are together leading the preparation of the nature-based solutions work stream for a climate summit that's going to take place on September the 23rd in New York. Mr. Guterres, the Secretary General of the United Nations, has asked the participants of that summit to greatly increase their ambition for climate action within the context of the Sustainable Development Agenda. So, speaking on behalf of New Zealand, if you don't mind, what is your ideal for what might happen in this climate summit, linking nature into climate action?
Yeah, I mean, it's very simple and not so simple, but I think that thinking about nature as an integrated system and what can we learn from nature in providing solutions for climate change would be a great place to start. I think for us as New Zealand, we're just starting on a journey, so I think understanding from others also what they're trying would be really important.
Thank you very much indeed. Just picking up on that, now Massimo, there is some conversation now that perhaps it's time also to have a world summit on food systems and how food systems can be transformed to achieve all the objectives that you've been talking about. And there's a plan to perhaps do that in 2021. It's still at very earliest stages, and it's not yet firm, by the way, so please don't announce it in social media. It's just work in progress. As one of the warriors for in the planetary emergency, what do you feel this summit plan might achieve, and are you kind of confident that we'll be able to get there?
So you broke the secret. So of the summit. but
I'm breaking secrets all the time. I think that it has to happen. Yeah.
Okay, so look, I think it's a great idea because it will help a lot to standardize what the food system concept is. But especially, at least for me, I am working on the technical side of this concept, is to be able to prioritize what are the trade-offs. So if I decide to go through a path like New Zealand, for example, what will imply in terms of the cost for them, the trade-offs that will imply. It will have some trade-offs. If I want to do something in India, my trade-off mostly will be water. Okay? If I want to do something in another region, my priority trade-off will be different. So if we are able to at least map with the regions what are the priority trade-offs, then we can assess what are the potential impacts, the distributional effects, and so on. It's very easy to say, don't eat meat anymore. But I am sorry, that's not feasible. The price will go up. And the poor people who still need to eat meat won't be able to afford it anymore. And there are different types of meat. So there are cows which are grass-fed, which don't emit as much, and there are others which are not. But we need to be careful. And that's where we need to identify trade-offs, to be able to assess what are the impacts and what are the benefits. And therefore, we can prioritize and we can focus in solving specific solutions. The problem we have, I think, is that we come up with many ideas, but we don't prioritize them and we don't focus them. And we need to focus them to find the light.
Thank you very much indeed. So here we are, really trying to take forward the transformation of climate action so that nature comes into the center, the biodiversity transformation that you heard about from Cristiana Pasca-Palma. There's going to be a lot of stuff on that in 2020. And we'd like to try to see real effort on food systems at the head of government, head of state level in 2021, all within the context of working on the planetary emergency. In New Zealand, you have a community of people who could have told us that we were getting it wrong if only we'd listened to them. That's why when I introduced you, I said that you come from Manatu Mo Te Taiao. Could you tell us a bit about what you are learning from the indigenous peoples of your country?
Yeah, so if you hadn't gone there, I would have this was my last thing to say. So I said in the beginning that the wellbeing budget and what it's based on, which is a living standards framework, which is a trade-off framework, is a way station. Actually, in New Zealand, we have a model that goes beyond that puts nature first. So we have a couple of examples where the rights of nature have been put into the legislation. So personhood in Whanganui River and to Ururua Forest, where the decision has to be back to that nature first as opposed to people. So we're basically relearning some of the old ways about what does that mean in practice when people still need livelihoods. And there are some really great examples of that in practice. And I think that takes us beyond a living standards or a trade-off or a natural capital type approach to saying, actually, there's a different way that we value nature alongside us as human beings. And it's taken me a while to come to that, but I think there's something in that us as humanity needs to strive towards.
We're now going to have to stop, and I'm sorry because I was going to try to push Maximo on something, but we'll talk about it in private. I think just two or three things. Vicki, Massimo are warriors for people and planet. They're leading in the response to the planetary emergency. Both of them are working in areas that take them beyond their comfort zones. Both of them are people who are really expressing extraordinary courage, though they are extremely understated. Both of them believe that we only get change if we're a critical mass working together. Speeches are great, but it's getting your sleeves rolled up and doing the work that really matters. Please give an extraordinarily warm hand to these two warriors for people and planet.
Very nice.